of Parsons. Any of you heard of Parsons? That's just as well. We at Chicago ridiculed that emphasis, and we paid more attention to evidence that we got and gathered by field work and other means. So initially, I really spent a lot of attention trying to convince people that sociology had a relevance to peace work. In 1968, I published a book of readings on social problems in international relations. And then I published a book, The Sociology of Social Conflicts. And I must say, it did gather a lot of attention despite its title. My mentor, Professor Hughes, said, "Don't you ever use that title again." So I never did. But it did have some novelty in trying to look at all kinds of conflicts, big and small, long and bad, and short and good. Particularly in chapter 5 on escalation and de-escalation, I discovered that there was hardly any literature on de-escalation. Everything was always on, what are those people doing? Why are they doing it? And making trouble. The reader for the manuscript said that chapter earned the price of the book, and the publisher immediately wanted to publish it. I thought it was a draft, but as a young scholar, I was not going to argue with immediate publication. That was a beginning, but it wasn't the end of then for me. I found that there were a lot of other things being done in practice and in theorizing about peace research in Europe, peace studies in the United States. Numerous people who had been doing work on nonviolence and on ways in which conflicts could be prevented or modified or dealt with effectively and constructively. I finally got out a new edition of the Sociology of Social Conflicts. It was called Social Conflicts. I taught a course in social conflicts at the University of here, and published another edition called Social Conflicts in 1982, both with Prentice Hall, which didn't seem very eager about making reprints, revisions. So I went to Rowman and Littlefield, and the first book, called Constructive Conflicts, came out, and that was in 1998. And after that, there were a series of editions, and when the fourth edition was promoted by the editor, I sought out Bruce, who had been a student here and worked on this material, if he would join as a co-author, which he did. And that was the beginning of the collaboration. one important element that he added immediately was to point out that this whole approach had some core ideas, and he identified some. We've over the years we've identified several. We're not always consistent. I don't think it matters. There are there's nothing magical. There are many elements to an approach which sees conflicts as possibly constructive, not even, and even constructive to varying degrees, perhaps, among the adversaries. So I think we, Bruce and I, we're going to try to make sure there's conversation. If need be, we'll talk to each other, but hopefully we'll talk with you, and he will talk a little bit more about the newest edition in which he is the first author. Bruce, take it away.
All right, thanks, Lou. Hi, everybody. Sorry we're not there in person with you. I was in your shoes. I'm a Maxwell grad, got my PhD in political science from Maxwell. I've had a lot of varsity pizza. It looks like you're still eating varsity pizza. So one of the nice things about the conversation series was a free lunch and get your thoughts provoked a little bit. So as Lou said, I'm going to talk a little bit about the now, not so much where the book came from, but what I have seen as developments in the field that I think are interesting since I first got involved with the 4th edition, and we're now in the 6th edition. And let me just say, Lou mentioned kind of the core ideas we start at, or we outline in the book. To me, I remember I came to Maxwell because of Lou and the Park program. And I remember my attraction was immediately to the first principle in conflict transformation, which seems so elegant, but strangely not understood by so many people, that social and political conflicts are natural, they're inevitable, and they're essential. We're never going to live in a world without conflict. As social beings, from the moment we are born, we are learning about how to manage conflicts. We can't avoid them. There will never be a kumbaya moment where we're holding hands and we're one world and we've overcome all conflicts. So the question isn't how to avoid conflicts and make sure we don't experience them, but how can we constructively engage with the inevitable conflicts that we will face interpersonally, within organizations, across identity groups for the rest of our lives. And that seems such a elemental aspect of this field to me, and such a powerful idea, and liberating too, because then the question is, or the solution is, there's so many tools for conflict transformation and constructive conflict management that we've learned about as a community. And the goal is to put those tools in as many hands as possible so that we can try to overcome the monumental challenges we're facing. So to me, that is the origin of my attraction to this field, and really what most of my work with Lou and elsewhere is focused on. But again, it's interesting to look at how things have evolved in the book and to see how the field has evolved and what questions and tensions to me are dominant as we released the 6th edition recently. So I'm going to mention what I see as 7 overarching questions, tensions, dynamics that I think represent the now of conflict transformation in this field. The first is just this remarkable growth in the field of conflict transformation that probably you can't appreciate But when I was starting out in the field, there were only a handful of university centers that were dedicated to studying conflict. And there was an organization called the Hewlett Foundation that in the late 1990s gave a bunch of money to American universities, hoping to explode this field of studies in conflict management and what was called conflict resolution at that time. And they identified 18 universities. Syracuse was one of them, and they gave them some money, and Park and what you're participating in today is part of that legacy. But imagine the growth from the late 1980s, 18 university centers. There are now hundreds. And I travel and train internationally. The number of universities now that have certificates in conflict studies programs, master's degrees, PhDs in conflict studies really speaks to an exponential almost growth of this field that I think is really encouraging. So that's one trend. The second is not so much of a trend, but a continuation of the reality that conflict studies and conflict transformation really is a truly interdisciplinary field. So those of you who are studying conflicts, I would argue you can't just study it as a political scientist. You can't just study it as a sociologist or a geographer or an anthropologist. Really, to understand conflict processes, you have to adopt a multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary perspective. And that dynamic, I think, has continued as the field has evolved. But there have been some interesting new additions. So in this edition of the book, it is the first time that I found us writing for the first times about the contributions of neuroscience and neuropsychology to the field of conflict studies, which to me is one of the new big fields in conflict studies, people studying the brain and trying to understand how genetic and epigenetic forces create conditions in which people find themselves gravitating to conflict or turn on certain neural pathways if you're exposed to trauma, for instance, or you grew up in wartime. So there's this big explosion of neuropsychology, which I think is interesting for a number of reasons, not the least of which is it brings up a core debate that has always been difficult, determinism in conflict studies versus whatever the opposite is. And I think that tension is still there today, the extent to which our biological attributes should be considered an important factor in why conflicts occur versus the learned experiences and cultures and behaviors and all the other non-deterministic forces that make up conflict. That debate, if anything, I think is getting a little stronger with the addition of neuropsychology in the field. Third, I see that the field still suffers from a degree of what I might think of as tribalization. And one of the unique things about constructive conflicts is we treat conflict holistically, whereas many other books break conflicts into constituent parts. There's environmental conflicts and labor management conflicts. There's issues of war. So I think there's a tendency in the field for viewing conflict as something that happens within individual domains. And one of the great contributions, I think, of Lou's work is the notion that conflict can be studied outside of just one domain, and comparing and understanding conflict across different domains offers us a greater chance at understanding that than just sticking within labor management or negotiation or other parochial fields. Fourth, huge tension today between, well, there's that saying, there can never be peace without justice. And that points to what I see as an emerging, very strong tension in the field today that we write a lot about in the book, which is that there are those in the field who are dedicated to what I might think of as peace pushing, as activism, at focusing on structural inequality, and at focusing on how can we become change agents that non-violently push peace by revealing inequalities, by shutting things down, by being activists. And when I look at my students today, that's one camp of the students that's attracted to the field. And the other camp of students that are attracted to the field come much more from what I might think of as the conflict transformation. Less interested as conflict as something that is being caused by external realities and structures, and more interested in conflicts as something that's occurring in our heads and in our hearts and in the way that we tell stories and narratives about ourselves and others. And these are two very distinct traditions, and they're often they often have a hard time talking to each other. So I go to two conferences a year. One is the Peace and Justice Association conference, which is all about activism. And the other is a conference called PeaceCon, which is all about conflict transformation. And it's a healthy tension that I think needs to be explored more directly. I think fifth, there continues to be a healthy debate about the role of violence in constructive conflicts. And I know people in the field that eschew violence in any form. And as Martin Luther King would say, violence begets violence. And others who see violence in some circumstances of great oppression and inequality as being justified as a legitimate tool for transforming conflicts. And this is a tension that Lou and I have to deal with all of the time. And it's one that continues to animate the field. And the question is violence ever permissible? Can it ever be constructive? Can it ever be selectively applied along with less violent tactics in order to bring about changes? There's an ends versus means debate here. So I think this continues to be an animating conversation. And then finally, the last two to mention briefly is there's a great local turn since we begun to write on this, in that conflict. I think when I first entered Maxwell, it was seen as a top-down enterprise, and all these brilliant scholars in the global north knew how to do it, and those poor societies struggling with failed states and with violence, we were going to teach them what the skills are based on this great research being done. And increasingly, obviously, there's a local turn that much of the practice out there today is derived from local practices. And what I have seen in funding sources and in program development is, how do you tap local knowledge in conflict transformation and create programming that takes advantage of all the things scholars know how to do, but also the local practices that are relevant and appropriate for particular culture. So a local turn. And last, that includes now a turn to the United States, where a lot of organizations I work with frequently were working out there. And now all these organizations are rushing to work in here because we're realizing history has not ended. Populism, ugly parochialism has come to the United States in ways that are too obvious for us to ignore. And so much of the practice in conflict transformation that used to be applied internationally is now being applied in the United States. And some of the most interesting work now is happening in transforming conflicts occurring within our own communities. So I'll stop there just as a way of saying what I think of as kind of interesting happening now. Lou has talked a little bit about the evolution of his thinking and how this book came to be. And we'll turn it over to conversation at this point for all of you. And Logan, I think if you want to just man the microphone, and anyone who would like to make a comment or ask a question, we can spend a little time discussing these ideas or other things you'd like to engage with us about.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd invite anyone who has a question, if they're willing to possibly step up toward the aisle, since I'm not sure how far it'll take back. Yeah, so the floor is yours. If you don't want to camera on, you go.
Allie Holtzapfel, and I'm just gonna go first. Bruce, I know you in a shadow way because I do 2-year lectures in my class here called Being Conflict, Being Peace, the conflict drivers and the framing, because they're just indelible. So thank you for that. I have a curiosity. So there's the conflict drivers, right? So there's structural, there's identity, and there's the chart, and there's the methods of transformation. Where are we going with a 5th driver, which would be intrapersonal? Because to me, the evolution of conflict begins with the origins of violence inside. And, you know, Obama pointed out an empathy deficit. So just as we switch, obviously global conflict will always exist. But to me, we're seeing an escalation of, you know, individual school shootings, gang violence, you know, police brutality, obviously. So in my opinion, and then the idea of oppression being, you know, internalized oppression as a significant factor in a human being's orientation towards violence. So I'm just curious about the idea of that as a 5th driver and if that's happening in the conversations. So thank you.
Thanks. I'll start, and Lou, maybe you can add to how you see that.
Yes.
Yeah, so first of all, well, I'm glad you're still using that model. That's great. And models are not real, right? They're just ways of categorizing research to make it easier to study. And so I'm not claiming that model exists independently. But what you say is interesting. And to me, I guess the question is where does that internal process begins? And I would say it crosses each of the, if you think about the structural elements of what it means to be raised in American society, intersecting with the narratives and belief systems and cognitions that children are part of, I would say that is covered in what you're talking about. It's partly a levels of analysis issue as well. It's so what happens at the individual level may be a product of, well, I would say each of those drivers can be a product of it. So I'm not sure that it's separate other than it's an expression of intersecting drivers. But I understand the question too, because there are many people who approach the field and they say, don't you know that peace begins within? And that the place to start, part of conflict transformation, is figuring out where do you enter the conflict? What do you do first? What activities must you do first? And I know many individuals who would say the first thing we always have to do is to create human beings who can tolerate difference and know how to have conversations and aren't subject to the kinds of things that developmentally might make them more prone to conflict later on. So part of what you're raising is this important question that is not an answerable question, but where do you begin in every conflict? Lou?
Yes, well, early on, I was struck by how conflicts are interconnected. No conflict is isolated from the world within and outside. There was this kind of shift that occurred after the 60s where people who struggled to make big changes were disappointed by what they could achieve. And many of them decided to work at a more local level at a community level, at a neighborhood level, at a family level, because they could see that whatever they did may have a bigger impact. So part of this is a matter of choice. There's no, and the beauty of studying all kinds of conflicts is because they all coexist. You know, the families that don't talk about politics because they're afraid that politics would be disruptive. There's a dynamic which it can be very powerful, but it also can be useful if you know that there are multiple connections. You can reframe the conflict by saying which one is the important one. And you know, we see that all the time. We're saying, well, the real issue is this and this. What we would hope people gain from reading these books is ways in which to see the connections and how they can be shifted constructively and reframed constructively. And the fact that they're all interconnected isn't bad, it's inevitable, and it can be useful. That couldn't be so bad.
You know me. I guess I'm curious for you in your reflection of the field to maybe talk about things that have changed in terms of maybe things that didn't work or things that turned out to have you know, kind of negative repercussions or side effects, and what we've learned from that. But they started out maybe with the best of intentions, but we learned that either you have to do them differently or in different contexts. And so I'm just curious to capture those perspectives from you.
Lou,
Well,
do you
I
want
would hope that we learned that trying to destroy an adversary within your own world, community, country, is self-destructive. There is value to be had by thinking about the other side and what is desired by them and what might be mutually arranged. And I think we have so much goddamn evidence that failing to do that is a kind of terrible, terrible mistake.
There's two things that came to mind for me, Catherine. The first is really hard for conflict transformers to admit, but there is such a thing as what William Zartman a long time ago called a ripe moment. And there's moments, and that's when there's an exhaustion on the part of the parties with the unilateral imposition of their will, which isn't working. And there is also the development of an alternative way that both sides agree is beneficial to continuing to fight coercively. And I think that early on, I love to believe that there weren't always right moments, that there was always something we could do. And the unfortunate reality is sometimes the parties have to experience exhaustion before an alternative is opened up. Now, that doesn't mean that nothing can happen. You can chip away at small increments of conflict transformation, maybe with populations that aren't so polarized. But I think this notion of right moments, and that there's not always something transformative with the big T that is possible to do. The other thing that occurs to me is the notion of contact, and when contact can constructively transform a conflict. I mean, I was born in 1963 when I was very young. I grew up outside of Boston. There was the policy of busing was implemented. There was this great social engineering scheme that if only we bring together white and largely Black, poor and affluent school systems together, they would be in contact with each other, and some kind of great transformative insights and rehumanization and breakdowns of stereotypes. And I can tell you in many communities around Boston, that policy had the opposite impact, that the contact that was facilitated led to some degree of greater polarization. Something went wrong with the social engineering approach. And I think a great amount has been learned about how do you nurture contact between identity groups, particularly in highly antagonistic and escalated circumstances, and whether there is a time to do that and not to do it, and under what conditions can it be done, with a result more likely being the increase of tolerance and understanding and undermining of stereotypes and prejudice and dehumanization and all of that. And so I think the field has had to learn to be more careful with the kinds of experiments it uses to help transform people by simply bringing them together. Bringing people together in one room doesn't necessarily mean good things will happen. Sometimes really bad things can happen.
Thank you.
What can we do? Hoping someone else would vote next, but I'm Diane. I am involved with the Intergroup Dialogue Program, as Lou knows, and have also been somewhat involved with a community dialogue that Lou is very instrumental in having started. So this is the dialogue on the local level of people getting in the same room face to face. One of the things that I've given a lot of thought is that on the one hand, people say you can't have dialogue if there's a power difference. And on the other hand, why bother if there isn't a power difference? What we need to be transforming is the conflict that comes about because of the differences. And a lot of what I have found, well, one of the many things I've found really fascinating is how sometimes people and groups with less power can achieve their goals within a dialogue, even though there's a power imbalance. And I think my experience is mostly on the small interpersonal level, but I wonder, I mean, most of the things that I've read about power and, you know, the lesser powers winning is in the nonviolence literature. But are there other literatures? Are you addressing in the book the ways in which those with lesser power can achieve their goals within a conflict situation?
Well, one thing I was mention is at the very beginning of peace research, peace studies, was the notion that inducements by one side towards the other to win over some agreement is not based solely on coercion. Some people generally define conflict as when somebody's hurting somebody else. That's built into the definition, and it's built into the sensibility of many of us. And the contribution that I think the field has emphasized is that it's not power alone. It is also persuasion, which might be said that, well, it's appealing to other principles, but it's convincing somebody of something that they may not have thought about. And it's the promise of benefits. That can be corrupt. They can, bribe some piece of the other side. But there is and the civil rights struggle demonstrated how powerful and useful and effective those other persuasive and promise of benefits. The South has flourished economically in a way that it never would have if segregation persisted. And damn it, most of the people know that. Yeah. A lot of the business people said, yeah, let's get on with the business. I think paying attention to the other dimensions, the other kind of inducements can be helpful.
I'm actually curious what you do as a trainer. Yeah. Because to me, a lot of that has to do with what are the ground rules that the facilitator sets up? Is there training that you do prior to the dialogue with different groups in order for them to better interact if there's a power differential? Are there readings you might have them do? Is there an acknowledgement that you seek to bring power into so what strategies do you use?
Yeah, that is all part of the program. The intergroup dialogue program started in the early 2000s with research, a 10 university research project to develop the curriculum. And so there's a very specific curriculum, and then there's a lot of branches off of it that have developed. For quite several years, I was one of the facilitators in the program. Now I work with the facilitators who are generally all grad students, and we're always happy to have more possible facilitators. They often come from the School of Education, but not entirely. And yes, there's a lot of training of the facilitators first. The course begins with getting to know one another, and first with ground rules that are developed by the group. And that involves a lot of thought about what makes it easy to communicate, what will equalize the power, so that people in marginalized groups feel that they can say what's on their minds and not feel like they're going to be in trouble later after class or whatever. Just a number of ways that people think about how to communicate with each other in constructive and meaningful ways. So the guidelines are developed, then people develop relationships, and then we study the sociology of inequalities and then develop action projects. So it's also oriented to acting on these issues.
Yeah.
A little bit one can do at the end of a semester.
Yeah, fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for asking.
Hi there. Thank you. This is great, and thank you for your great work. My name is Amanda. I'm a second-year doctoral student in public administration. And if you were to ask me, I'd say I study collaboration, right? The second C in PARC. But in taking, learning more about your work, taking Todd's class last semester, I'm struck by, wait, do I actually study conflict? And it's hand in glove, but why don't the literatures speak to each other, right? Why are these siloed kind of experiences? So I'm wondering if you can help me make sense of the relationship between the two C's in part, conflict and collaboration, and how you navigate that in your work, and any advice you have for someone trying to navigate that as a young scholar and identifying themselves in those spaces. And thank you again.
Well, I will say one thing, that when the change of the name occurred, it did lead, well, it was preceded and followed by considerable discussion of what the implications were. And we had a little seminar, and it resulted in a little book called Conflict and Collaboration, edited by Catherine and myself. And part of the seminar was pretty soon to recognize that not only can there be good and bad conflict, there can be good and bad collaboration. And therefore you begin to see that these are not polar opposites in any way. They are different aspects of a relationship which is broader than either one of them. In any relationship, there are contested, conflictful elements and practices, and also some collaborative ones. And the mix can change. And if you look at it that way, some of the problem of how do you deal with one or the other, I think gets mitigated, hopefully. It's a nice little book.
I enjoyed it, thank you.
Maybe Catherine wants to say something about that.
I'd like to hear Bruce.
I would say academics can have hours and hours long conversations about semantics, and they don't change anything. And I've been part of those conversations. To me, collaboration is a tool. Conflict is the condition. Conflict's not a bad thing. It's not a good thing. It is a state of social creatures living together. What are the means we use to manage conflicts is the question. Collaboration, to me, is one of the means that we can choose to use to manage conflicts. And sometimes the conditions are such that collaborations are easy to achieve. Sometimes the conditions are such that they're not easy to achieve. Contention, active fighting is another tool people can use to manage the inevitable conflicts that they face. And dozens of other potential tools. So I personally think the problem with putting collaboration and conflict together is that they suggest a one or the other. And I would say collaboration is a subset of conflict. But again, these are interesting conversations that help us think through what we're studying, but it's easy to get lost in them and make that your work without it really making too much of a difference. What do you think, Catherine?
I agree with both of you. But what worries me, I think to both of your points, is when we pick things apart and study them so in depth that we forget the larger picture. We wouldn't have collaboration if there weren't some condition calling for it. And that condition will have an influence on the nature of a lot of the collaboration. And it may be that if one looked at the condition, collaboration might not be the right thing. So I worry that by creating these little boxes, it's the hammer nail problem. Oh, let's go to collaboration, right? When in fact, that particular problem, condition, or whatever it is, might better be managed by some other, some other mechanism. So, so I think to both of your points, it's that the more thoughtful piece that says, well, what is the nature of the issue, and the nature of the relationship, and the nature of the mechanisms we want to use, and not just rushing because we now have this developed field, and so we just feel compelled to use it.
Get in the hot seat here. Hey, Lou and Bruce, it's so good to meet you. I feel like I know you because my name's Todd Dickey. I'm in the public administration department and have taught 601 now twice, and have taught the online version that you are a guest in. And so great to virtually meet you, and it's good to see you, Lou. One of the things that I find really fascinating is, and I really appreciate the work both of you have done to create this interdisciplinary space that is the field of conflict transformation. At the same time, I find it fascinating that for how interdisciplinary it is, there's actually a lot of conversations happening outside of this sphere around conflict. I'm most familiar with the management literature, but the management literature, it hasn't been really interested in joining the conflict transformation conversation, and is having its own conversation. And I'm also thinking about humanities, in the sense of, thinking back to high school English classes, how we were learning, right? All of the different ways novels are structured. It was like man versus nature, man versus himself, man versus, and so, that's conflict too. And so I think for how interdisciplinary the field is, there are still gaps. I think that's exciting. But I also think I would be interested in hearing from both of you for disciplines that haven't joined the conversation. Do you want them to, or are you fine with some disciplines having their own conversation, because it doesn't necessarily align with conflict transformation or conflict studies as the way it's presented in constructive conflicts? Thanks. Get out of the hot seat.
It's a good question. I would be interested in your answer. One thought I have is that all the discussion now about the social media, and the way in which language is used and distorted and misunderstood and so on, is very rich and deserves the growing attention that it's getting. And it does involve knowledge about arenas which are novel. People are more or less familiar with all the different social media, and that's so much to absorb. There are many people who are lost in it and can't find a way out. Anyway, just thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's a big tent, and the more that are under the tent, the better. And the challenge of negotiating meaning and doing research in a big tent is much more difficult than doing it in a small tent. I mean, I remember when I came to Maxwell as a student, and I came because of Park and Lou's work, and my first choice was, do I enter the PhD in social science or do I enter it in political science? And I was so scared at what it would mean to enter it as a social scientist, absent the comfort of disciplinary conferences and journals, that I entered it as a political scientist. My undergrad was in political science too. And so I think what you're talking about is partly an artifact of the fact that those doing research and pushing a lot of work in the field are doing it within the confines of their own disciplines, with their own rules of promotion and what journals to write into and what topics are permissible. So even though learning about conflict dynamics by comparatively looking at interpersonal, what happens there, labor management, what happens there, organizational, civil war, Russia, Ukraine, I can do that in my head. I can't think of a lot of journals, maybe a couple, that would encourage that kind of work or have the tolerance for that kind of transdisciplinary work. So yes, I think that's one of the services of PARC, I think, is that this is creating a space to understand the phenomena of conflict at multiple levels of analysis through different interdisciplinary lenses, with a flexible enough model for how do you analyze conflicts and choose transformations that you can almost adopt a contingency theory, pick and choose among the theories and approaches that best suit the particular circumstance, as opposed to having a prescribed circumstance because of your own disciplinary point of view. So I think it's a big problem. It's a problem that can be solved by inviting a lot of people in and establishing the big tent, but a lot of work would need to be done to further galvanize this as a truly multidisciplinary field and have universities recognize the value of that kind of work.
I have a quick question. So I'm actually kind of basing this off of two themes. One was mentioned that you both mentioned during the talk today. One was about Lou mentioned whether violence is ever a permissible tactic as a means of breaking this complex cycle. And part of I actually have your book right in front of me right now, and I'm going to pick a quote here that I thought was very interesting. It says that violence is the bluntest of instruments for conflict management. Relying on it signifies a failure of imagination and creativity. And I find that almost humorous. It's almost like saying, well, it's just lazy to now you're just being lazy. Like that's a cheap tactic. And I was also curious how we would kind of reconcile that with Bruce mentioned kind of this rise of illiberal populism and this growing acceptance of violence as a tactic and against even imagined and created threats. And we've seen that in the US, we've seen it in the Philippines, seen it worldwide. And I'm just kind of curious how how you guys would kind of reconcile those, that as a tactic and that as a trend globally now. Because you also continue to write that in some situations, such as an unprovoked attack by an adversary, violence may be the only short-term avenue available for survival. So for people who feel that their survival is at stake, even if it's an imagined threat, and how are we to respond to those threats to our democracy? Yeah.
Well, I'll start. That's such a complicated matter.
Yes. Yeah.
And I guess part of it is for whom, to whom are you asking the question? I remember when Johann Galtung was here, and he said he was a conscientious objector in World War II. He was a pacifist, but he began saying, maybe 10% of the population ever can really accept that. So we have to deal with that reality. And that's one way of speaking and thinking, accommodating to what the reality seems to be. I think of the German poet after World War I, when Germany was falling apart, and he, for a little time, was a pacifist and president of the Bolshevik country in southern Germany, and the fascists were marching, brown shirts were marching. And what was he to do? He was a pacifist. He was a president. He was facing an army that would certainly destroy them. He decided the people would want him to say, fight. So we will fight and die. There's no way, I think, I can't see how there's one answer that anybody will satisfy everybody with. It's a very personal thing, I think, for each of us. And you kind of assess the situation and think about the alternatives. Too ready, in America, we're the big macho country with the biggest guns in the land in the world. And as one Secretary of State said, why do we have a big army and are afraid to use it? What's it for? And you say, yeah, you prepare for it, then God damn it, then you feel you should use it. So I would urge us to prepare for other methods. Anyway, I could go on, but I won't.
No, thank you. I appreciate it.
I'll just add, I know we're out of time, so
Yeah.
I'll just add quickly that I remember that sentence in the book, and I certainly believe it. Violence is the bluntest of instrument, and it's hard to me to find very many cases where a reliance on violence proved to be the most constructive strategy, just the opposite. The problem is that you can make that argument rationally. I mean, clearly, Putin's use of violence against Ukraine is getting him further away from all of the interests that he has rather than closer to them. Rationally, that's just so clear to say. So the question is, why the reliance on violence? Why the reliance on this strategy? And then you have to get into an analysis of the role that fear and humiliation and internal narratives that are being spun to justify what's happening are all the dominant forces that's leading him to choose that bluntest of possible interests, which ironically is getting him further away from what he wants rather than closest to it. So I think the challenge is those of us who write about this see conflict management often through a rational lens, as if human beings are rationally calculating on costs and benefits. If I do X, I will get closer to what I want. So I will do it, and don't account enough for the role that those underlying emotional drivers play in really directing what can be self-destructive and other destructive choices. And so that requires a whole different form of interventions if you want to deal with those underlying drivers related to things like humiliation, which I think is often at play in a lot of the most destructive conflicts in the world. But it's a good question. I think it's a question you ask has no answer. The value is asking and debating it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Thank you for taking the time to hash that out. I really appreciate it. I know everyone else, I speak for everyone else when I say we appreciate your time and answers to all of our questions. And we are just about out of time, but thank you so much for your flexibility and both being willing to do this over Zoom today. The format worked out much better than I was hoping. So it's been great. Thank you both.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone,
you.
for coming. Bye.
Bye.
All right. See you later.